This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard it read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include John Hood, whom we welcome back after a couple of weeks, syndicated columnist and author; Connie Wilson, who's a former legislator; former Secretary of State and former Attorney General Rufus Edmisten; and current Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch. Well, this week we're going to discuss fallout resulting from the repeal of HB2. We'll talk about appointments to the UNC Board of Governors and a proposal to change state employee health and retirement benefits. Let's get started. The enactment of HB 142, the kinda sorta repeal of HB2, has created a storm of its own, both from the right and the left. A common reaction is that we sold out our state for a basketball game, and some have even suggested it's little more than putting lipstick on a pig. We want our panel to talk about what this bill and doesn't do. John, we'll go into more detail about the details, but this bill has been soundly criticized. Do you think this is the best compromise that could be passed by the legislature and signed by the governor?
Well, I think the stipulation, the way you put it, the answer is yes. If you wanted this issue to be downshifted, if you wanted something approximating the status quo ante to be restored before the entire dispute occurred so that North Carolina would be back to some kind of normality, then this was probably the best you could expect. That's the best they could do, and that is essentially what came out of it. The governor probably could have cut a better deal. In fact, we know he could have cut a better deal with the legislature back in December, but obviously he didn't think so at the time. I think he learned in his first few weeks on the job how difficult the issue was to work through the legislature. There are more than two sides to it. There's different pieces of the original bill and different opinions about each piece. So I think they got about as much work on this done as they could, and they basically restored normalcy, which was really the goal.
Well, that's the question. Let's look at what this bill contains, Rufus. It says that all bathrooms, locker rooms, and changing rooms overseen by state agencies, counties, cities, and school districts must be used by persons according to the gender on their birth certificate, and only the General Assembly can establish rules for public bathrooms. Does this, in fact, restore us to the status quo prior to the Charlotte Ordinance?
Not really. I don't think so. This is something you're never going to solve. John hit it right when he said there are all these varying opinions. I would have had a hard time explaining to my 83-year-old mother what this is all about, and there's still a lot of people that don't understand it.
They will after we finish.
The only way to have it clean was to wipe everything off the books, including that other stuff they put in there about municipality could not require that people give something above the minimum wage, other things like that. The whole thing was much to do about nothing, in my opinion, and it's time to get it over with, done. And I don't care if somebody says basketball did it. I'm glad it did it.
Well, it got it done anyway. Chris, this bill does include a non-discrimination provision, but it defines discrimination by color, national origin, age, handicap, or biological sex, and obviously leaves out sexual orientation and gender identity. By the way, haven't the federal courts ruled on this business of sexual orientation?
Well, this past week, they're split on it. There's been one federal court that has ruled that the term sex includes sexual orientation. There's another federal court that ruled this past week that it does protect people based on sexual orientation. So this is going to the Supreme Court. But I think the thing Speaker Moore said after the vote and a couple times in public appearances and radio shows and so forth, that North Carolina is like 19 states. 19 states in America protect LGBT people, gay people, from being fired because they're gay or denied services. And he said that means we're in step in effect with 30 other states, which is not true. All but 3 states in the country either protect it statewide or allow local governments to provide those protections. So that's 47 states where if you live in Charlotte or Raleigh, right now there's nothing the local governments can do. If you live in Columbia, South Carolina, you cannot be denied a service because you're gay. Think about that. Columbia, South Carolina is more progressive than Charlotte and Raleigh now because of this law.
How about Mississippi? We always compare ourselves to Mississippi. That's a moot question. All right, Connie, so far as it goes, this bill blocks all non-discrimination ordinances by cities, counties, local governments until December of 2020. Is this because they think that the courts will have definitively ruled on these issues by that time?
I think it's two-pronged. Definitely the courts, and there's going to be another court decision, or at least if the bill had not passed, the Fourth Circuit would have been considering a case in May. But I think it gives the voters, the chance to vote on these people that are running for office, for and against House Bill 2 and what it stood for, and it puts it out several years, so the voters will have the say.
Rufus, you ran as a Democrat for a number of years statewide. A lot of Democrats were incensed with Governor Roy Cooper. In fact, as a former chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party who promised to give $100,000 to whoever would run against Roy Cooper in the primary in 2020 and help him to raise money for election. Was he right? Was Cooper right?
I think Roy Cooper did the best he could, and I'm glad he did it. It's bringing to this some closure for a while. And the 2020 thing to me is just kicking the can down the road, Connie. For what reason, I don't know. But I praise Roy Cooper because he's taking a part of it and saying, okay, we're done with this part.
So it's over and done. But the NCAA said the bill was far from perfect, John, reluctantly agreeing to consider North Carolina as a site for future postseason games. But they also included a condition, which was not widely reported, that any site awarded a championship event must submit documentation showing that student athletes and fans will be protected from discrimination. What do you think about that reaction, and could it be a game changer?
No, it won't be a game changer at all. Each community that offers to host one of these championship games will submit some document about how they're going to protect people from being discriminated against, and that'll be the end of it.
But legally, according to this state law that was just passed, they can't do that,
They can't pass anti-discrimination ordinances, but that's not what the NCAA required. The key thing here is the NCAA and lots of other organizations, sports and business, they got themselves way out on a limb. They appreciated the opportunity to walk back off of that limb. So
everybody was kind of saving face?
Absolutely. It's basically everybody had kind of played chicken, and they were all running up into each other, and somebody had to decide this entire blow-up is not going to solve the problem, and it's just going to exacerbate the tensions. Instead of let people talk about this a little bit more and figure it out better. So I think everybody stepped back away from the abyss. That is what pretty much everybody wanted to do, except those who profited from or really thought highly of the fight. They wanted to keep the fight going. Both of those groups, both the ones who had supported HB2 and the LGBT community, they were furious at the end. The LGBT folks in particular, until the compromise, they were perfectly fine with sports leagues from out of state telling North Carolina what to do. And as soon as they no longer had that wind in their sails, they complained about sports people telling North Carolina or being involved. So I just think it was a de-escalation.
So maybe this was putting lipstick on a pig, Connie. The business community seemed to be relieved the nightmare was over with. When will we know whether or not what impact this might have so far as future business relocations or new hires in our state?
From what I'm hearing, the compromise is supposed to take the pressure that was causing companies to be resistant to coming here because of the controversy. I think from a political standpoint, we'll see how much money is raised on this issue, because it was a big issue in last year's election. A lot of folks think it didn't have the results they thought it would have, and we'll just see what happens in 2018.
So let me ask you this, closing question on this segment. At the end of the day, what's your opinion of what HB 142 achieved, Chris?
Well, I think it did take some pressure off. It got some headlines. It barely, I think, a little bit, not entirely, repaired North Carolina's reputation. Two quick notes about it. Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest went to the House caucus and urged them to vote against a repeal. It'll be interesting to see what implications this has for Dan Forest's political future. And secondly, this issue is not over. I mentioned there are 47 states that allow local governments to provide protections or provide it as a state. We got to get into the 21st century and start protecting people from being fired or denied services because they're gay. It's ridiculous.
All right. Well, speaking of getting into the 21st century, if you signed up to receive our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle, it's easy. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and sign up. While you're there, you can view the latest NC Spend show, get video footage and perspective pieces not seen anywhere else, and read my weekly column. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State at ncspend.com, NC Spend on YouTube, or on Twitter at NC Spend Tweets. We're going to take a break and come back and talk about the UNC Board of Governors.
NC Spend will return after these messages.
In 2011, our farmers asked for 6,500 seasonal workers. Only 7 Americans showed up to work those jobs. Immigrant farm workers aren't stealing American jobs. To say otherwise ignores the facts. When farmers don't have enough skilled workers, crops go unharvested and farmers lose money. Consumers face fewer choices and higher prices. This is not acceptable. Tell Congress it's time to fix our broken immigration system.
Many of the 300,000 uninsured in our state are volunteer firefighters, farmers, fishermen, and small business owners. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
We now return to NC Spend.
When the UNC system was created in 1972, the legislature and Governor Bob Scott pushed for a 32-member board of governors to oversee it, with the legislature naming all 32 members. Hannah Gage, retiring former chair of that board, recently told us that for much of her tenure, she didn't even know the political party affiliation of most of the members, but that's all changed and the board is now highly partisan. Legislators also chose to reduce the number to 28 this year, 24 next year. Rufus, the Senate recently named 6 new members to the Board of Governors. They were all male, all white, and all Republican. What's your response to that?
That was their right to do so. Now let's go back though to 1972. I think that's where all the trouble started. They had no business giving the legislature the right to appoint people and not give a governor at least some appointments. You would have no problem with this disparity that you're talking about. And I always wondered why this was not brought before the courts, because if there's any separation of powers violation, I've never seen one worse than that you have the legislature appointing all the members of a very executive department in state government, the university system.
Well, not only do they control the budget, but they also appoint the members. Chris, I want to probe a little deeper in this. Now, the House came back and named their members this past week, and they did better than all white, all male, all Republicans. Most all Republicans, but there were, 2 or 3 females on that group at least. Comment on it.
Well, I mean, I think that, there's a lot of ways we can have diversity. I'm glad that it weren't all white males appointed by the House, but I do think it's ridiculous that they're all one political party. You know, the Democrats, a long time ago, they actually had racial categories. The court says you couldn't do that, but I think there is a way to have minority party representation. I think that would be a good idea. I think the whole system...
there is one Native American on this group.
Right, yeah. And there's a nominal Democrat, although he's a big funder, gives money to Republican campaigns. I think the whole system is absurd. It was absurd when the Democrats did it. We shouldn't have registered lobbyists on there. The thing that makes sense, and we talked about this with at an appearance last week in Wilmington with former member Hannah Gage, why does it make sense to have every campus have the chair of their trustees make up half the board and then divide the appointments between the legislature and the governor? I'm not sure the size matters. What matters is who appoints them and who they're accountable to. You have a board now that's literally accountable to the General Assembly that's passing the budget.
Well, it raises a good point, and we talked about it as we were at the UNC Watson School of Education last week. Excellent time spent there. Connie, there are a number of people that saying that number ought to be kept at 32, but that what we should do was appoint one person from each one of the constituent institutions, which would be 16 of the members, from the university system, so as to improve communication back and forth from the board to the universities. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think it's a great idea to have the individual schools represented, but what I was hearing over and over again from folk who are serving on the board and also from legislators is that the size of 32 was just unwieldy. There were just so many people, and when you compare it to other boards, it is extremely large. So taking it to a smaller size did make sense.
Yeah, but Bill Friday told us in an interview before he died that prior to the UNC system, he had 100 members on his board with the 3 constituent universities.
And did he tell you if he liked that or not?
Yes, he said he loved it because they were not only just 100 members, they were 100 people in North Carolina, he said. John, Okay, so let's talk about this partisanship. What's wrong with partisanship? What's the problem with partisanship on the Board of Governors, or is there one?
Well, the obvious argument for any kind of situation like this is you've got an institution that has a lot of different people in it, a lot of different interests, a lot of different regions of the state affected, and an organization like that presumably ought to have a board that is somewhat representative of the different groups and interests and opinions. Now, the Republicans would argue that even during the days the Democrats were in charge and there was some party differentiation, there weren't that many conservatives. You know, a lot of the Republicans who were appointed by the Democrats back in the day weren't really conservative Republicans.
I don't think we have to worry about liberals anymore.
That's true. So the ideological diversity seems to me is more important than partisan diversity.
All right.
What's wrong with the Jim Holzhauser?
But one of the people elected by Democrats was Peter Hans, who now works for who is widely respected as the chair of the Board of Governors under the Republicans. So the Democrats elected somebody who was a well-known Republican. I wish the Republicans would do the same thing.
A lot of this is by gentleman's agreement, Tom. That's the difference here. The Democrats started the whole thing.
Agreement. There's a new introduction here.
I'm all for it now.
As far as it goes, does it trouble anybody that the same group of people who are directly responsible for funding the university system now is also responsible for naming its Board of Governors? Does it say anything at all about autonomy between?
Well, that is quite literally the system we've had for decades. So there's absolutely nothing new about it. It's exactly the same way as it was when the board was originally created. Now, I tend to agree that we ought to change the way we not only change the size of the board, make it smaller, which I agree with, but we ought to change the way it is made up. But this is the system that we had from the very beginning.
Insiders tell me that there is a growing lack of autonomy, that the Board of Governor members are actually having and interfacing too much with the legislators who are funding them and appointing them. Comment on that. Anybody heard that?
Well, no,
Am I the only one that's heard this?
You don't have to hear it. You look at it and you see the people being elected with the legislators. They have some connection with the powerful that are in the legislature. That's what is faulty about this to me. And to me, it is a huge separation of powers problem. You asked that question, I'm answering you.
Well, why haven't they sued over it yet? They've sued over everything else.
Memo to self. Start a lawsuit. Don't make a suggestion.
I know.
It might happen. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about state employee benefits.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
State Treasurer Dale Falwell was on NC Spin several weeks ago talking about the $50 billion in unfunded liabilities the state health plan and retirement systems have accumulated. Now, everybody agrees something needs to be done, but the big question is how to be fair to taxpayers and state employees. Recently, Representative Andy Wells entered legislation that do away with the current retirement system for all new state employees hired after July 2018. And in its place, the state would institute essentially a 401k plan that would not guarantee a set benefit on retirement. Connie, there's some saying we should wait for Treasurer Falwell's recommendations before we proceed with this. Do you agree? And by the way, what do you think of Representative Wells' proposals?
Well, first of all, the General Assembly can do what they want when they want to do it, and that's fine. I think what Senator Wells brings up is actually part of a broader picture, and the broader picture is North Carolina is the largest employer in the state, and are we paying our employees enough? Do we have the right benefit package? Every year within the budget, there are little special provisions where we have employment areas where we can't hire people, so we have to do something special to pay more so we can hire those people. So there is something that needs to be done, but it probably needs to be done as a broader study.
Rufus, just to clarify, Representative Wells not recommending doing away with the retirement system. What he is saying is converting it from what's called a defined benefits plan over to essentially what's called a defined contribution plan. Is that your understanding essentially?
Yes, but as we know now, for things like insurance, the state pays it. And my concern is this, Tom, what kind of state employees are you going to get if the minute they retire, they have no insurance? Are they supposed to not get sick then? You know,
well, they have insurance. The issue that he was raising was that after they retire, they will not have any insurance.
I know, that's when you get sick a lot. You get older, and you get a lot sicker.
Because you're older.
yeah, okay, whichever is first. But I think somebody has to do something about it, and it would seem to me that you really need to do this thing in a very gradual piece, because it's not fair for me to get retirement. I think I earned it with all you put up with when you're elected official. But it's not fair for me to all those years it's been now about 20 some years, and not fair for me to go through life getting that, and somebody else that starts state government not get a penny.
Chris, comment on what impact this might have in hiring and retaining future state workers.
Well, I think it's part of a package. For years and years we were told, and we can't expect state employees to be paid at a private market level. There's just not enough money. We can't do that, but we will give them a very generous benefits package. Now we don't give them a significant raise for about 10 years, and now we're starting to erode their benefits. We're going to change their retirement. We're not going to give them retiree health care. We're going to, Treasurer Falwell's floated the idea of increasing health care premiums, making people pay more. It's going to be, that's a pay cut if we don't give them a pay raise. I think we're going to have a very hard time keeping and retaining.
So, John, what's
employees.
your prediction here? Are we going to wait for Treasurer Falwell? Are they going to make changes? Representative Wells' plan going to proceed?
I think North Carolina will eventually adopt some policies sort of like Andy Wells is recommending. It makes it very clear what the fiscal obligation of the state is. The state would be putting money into these accounts. It's not that the workers wouldn't get benefits. You would just have a very clear understanding up front of what the cost to the state would be.
Well, obviously, we're going to be tracking this as it goes along. After the break, we're going to ask the panelists to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
12,000 North Carolina veterans are uninsured with no options to buy health insurance. They fought for us. Now let's fight for them. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
So now it's time to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Connie Wilson, I'll start with you.
It's April, and they've been working at the legislature on the budget for several weeks now. Usually by now, the House and Senate leadership are frustrated with each other, and there aren't joint senior leadership meetings. Right now, they seem to like each other, and they're working together pretty well. It may mean that we can get out by early July. I don't think late June, but things are rolling well.
That's interesting. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Since 2010, about 4,000 North Carolina public school teachers have left the state and taken education jobs in other states. 4,000. During the same period, about 12,000 teachers have moved to North Carolina and taken jobs in the North Carolina public schools. We have had a net import into North Carolina of 8,000 teachers since 2010.
Interesting. Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
Connie mentioned that the budget process is underway, and this leads me to a point I'll try to make quickly. One of the big downfalls of Democrats in the legislature in the mid-'80s was an abuse of the legislative process, doing things in secret behind closed doors. They're doing it again. Not only that, they're frustrating. They're using the process for their own gains, and they're abusing their parliamentary powers.
Rufus.
Something funny. I'm going to be inducted into the North Carolina Boxing Hall of Fame. And the only time I got boxed was with my brother all the way to the creek.
You know, I can't even think of anything clever to use as a retort for that.
That explains a lot, Lucas.
See, that's why it's Lucas.
Sorry, you can.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.